Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Clifton Duncan. Clifton is a classically trained actor, singer, and Broadway veteran. Hey Clifton, thanks for coming on.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So I started following you, I think, because it was Carrie Smith. She'd included both of us in a tweet or something like that, and that I just started seeing your stuff and I started following you. And you've been speaking about a lot of the same things I have,
Yeah,
but you're doing it more from I don't want to say more from an artistic perspective, but you're bringing that into it. Um, because like I mentioned, you're a classically trained actor. You keep talking about Shakespeare and stuff like that. So
yeah.
when did you start noticing like the identity politics version of it? Because like sometimes I mean I keep saying it like woke and stuff like that, and that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. But some of it's not quite that either. It's just a weird type of identity politics. So like when did you start seeing all that start coming in?
Um, I don't know if there was ever any sort of solid point where I said, "Wait a minute, something is going on." I
Hmm.
think it might be more accurate to say that there was a point where I made certain internal decisions. One of them was, one was that I decided that I'm not my demographic. I'm a human being, and sort of alongside that decision was, or that internal shift was also saying, I'm not going to use my race as a crutch for anything that goes wrong in my life. Another shift happened a few years after that, probably 2 years after that, where I said, I'm not going to apologize anymore about being a man. And I'd really internalized this idea of my own inferiority, and the idea that women are wonderful, uh, no matter what they may or may not do or say. And between these two internal shifts, I began to increasingly feel as though there wasn't as much of a place in the industry, particularly the theater industry, for me. And to be honest, for years I'd stopped going to see shows in New York City. Not for one, it's so expensive; it's prohibitively expensive, to the extent where I feel like a part alongside with the ideological bent of the theater. I mean, people complain about so-called wokeness in Hollywood, but it's even more concentrated in the New York theater scene. And which is, if you want to be successful, as they say, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. I mean, it is the theatrical mecca. New York City is, or at least it was, we might get into that later, one of the cultural centers of the United States, if not the world. But I stopped going to shows because I felt like they were making whatever this progressive cabal, if you want to call it that, was doing. They were pretty much making shows to please themselves. And for years, I felt that the theater might be going the way of the opera in terms of being viewed as merely a bourgeois entertainment or luxury. And part of the reason is because of it's work that tends to appeal to this very, I don't want to call it a niche strain, but I think numbers wise, in terms of the people that are actually putting forth these ideas, it's very small. But in terms of people who actually agree with this stuff, I think the number is way, way, way smaller than we're led to believe. But um, so there wasn't a specific period where I said, "Oh, wait, something's going on." I think my views, once I changed with the way that I see myself, then the world outside, I began to react to what I was seeing more. And um, particularly within the last couple of years, I really, really unplugged from the whole sort of mainstream cultural narrative. I mean, I know that last night, as we're recording this, the Grammys were last night, and I was like, I could really care less. And and I think a lot of people feel that way. I think increasing numbers of people feel that way. And I think just in terms of everything that's happened within the past year or so and how things have really accelerated, I just began to feel as though I couldn't. Um, someone always says that someone has to say something, and at a certain point, I realized that maybe, I guess I'd have to be that someone. So I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop and seeing what the backlash is going to be. Um, but yeah, there was no specific moment. I think it just began with a personal decision over time. And then as things began to progress more and more, I felt myself more and more alienated from it. So I can't pick out a specific, so that's all to say that I can't pick out a specific.
That's fine. It's great. But like about some of this stuff, like the identity politics and whatever, but I notice it a lot because I've been focusing quite a bit on education. I notice a lot like in the things like the disrupt text and stuff like that. But then you also see it, representation in film and representation in Jesus Christ, getting rid of Apu for fuck's sakes. Okay. That really bugs me. Right. My family moved from India to Canada when I was 6 years old. Within 6 months, my dad started running a convenience store. Okay. And then from there, he went on and him and some of his friends started a factory. But like my dad was fucking Apu. Where's my representation now, bitch? Like seriously.
Right. Well, even I think even the idea, I mean, I hear about it all the time, representation. To me, the concept of representation is racist. I mean, I think to myself, anyone who knows you or anyone who knows me, how could any other person represent who and what we are? And to me, it's another way of saying that, one person represents all of us, or, it's almost another way of saying that we all look alike and we all are alike. We're all one thing. I mean, I thought stereotyping and prejudicial treatment was wrong, but that's what representation represents to me. But
I mean, like what I was trying to get at with that is like, I see it a lot on the literature side of things, school side of things. Okay. Get rid of Shakespeare. Cambridge wanted that, Leicester University, get rid of, Jesus Christ, why am I forgetting his name now? I've already canceled him. Chaucer, get rid of Chaucer there. Moby Dick is always on there, marked like Huck Finn, all that stuff. But they say, oh, there's not enough black authors, and there's not enough representation. Like if you hear that in the arts, or if you hear that in the theater and cinema, is there anyone actually going looking for stories? Is there someone going to, let's say, Africa and getting the mythology from there and saying, you know what, we'll make, because there are some cool myths that come out of there. Like you can make a pretty decent fantasy movie out of that. Is there anyone doing that? Or are they just sitting there complaining, saying there's not enough representation?
I mean, and we've seen in other arenas how these people, they'd like to tear things down, but they don't really offer anything in its place. I mean, I can think of examples of like the Nigerian playwright Wole Soyinka, who's most famous for the play Death and the King's Horseman. That play, there's a lot of it that's written in verse, and the research I did around it. I mean, I did it almost 20 years ago, but reading around the play and the author, I mean, he was very heavily inspired by more classical, European forms of art. I mean, there's so much of the play that's in verse and the way that it's theatricalized. But I mean, there are people out there that are utilizing different forms of storytelling and utilizing different. I mean, to be fair, I'm thinking specifically of my grad school experience. I went to New York University. They have a graduate acting training program for actors there, and it's a lot of it is very Eurocentric in terms of like, oh, you're learning clowning, or the Italian art, the commedia dell'arte, and you're learning very much. You're studying Shaw, you're studying Shakespeare, you're studying Ibsen. It's very much in this sort of white European canon. Then you get to the black playwrights. It's like Lorraine Hansberry and August Wilson, who was the most noted and celebrated black American playwright that ever lived. But at the same time, at least on a training level, we had teachers who would come in and incorporate like African gumboot dancing, which Americans who are familiar with, like for stepping, for instance, will be familiar with, in terms of just how different ways to tell stories and unlock it. And part of that is a reaction to like, okay, this is a very heavily Eurocentric form of education. I mean, so I think to be fair, that is an interesting way in terms of inviting new forms of storytelling and trying to find new ways to innovate. But at the same time, I don't think that the answer is pretending that Shakespeare, or Homer or whatever don't exist, because then you're not only throwing away those stories and what they teach us about humanity, but you're also throwing away, just fine examples of successful literature that puts across a great story that you can build and learn from, like Wole Soyinka did. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, okay, but what you were talking about there, that sounds like a really good way to say, okay, you know what, we're going to get different types of stories and different ways of telling stories, and you're not getting rid of the past. I mean, okay, I'm a bit of a science geek. You know, when Einstein came up with relativity, like they didn't just take Newtonian physics and throw it out the window. You still use that for stuff. You built off that, right? So, yeah,
Mm.
if you're living in the United States or Canada or the UK, I think you're gonna have to expect some Shakespeare in theater school. I mean, it would kind of make sense. But yeah,
Mm.
there's a plethora of other things out there to bring in. But on the education side of it, I just see like get rid of Shakespeare because we don't longer need that in the canon. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
you're impoverishing yourself. I mean, you are like I regret like I said, my family comes from India. My dad used to read a lot of Indian ghazals, and I mean, India's got 14 official languages. Like he could read one of them, and he used to read poetry and stuff and fiction in that language. Now, I never learned to read it because came out here, learned English, I could speak it, but I kind of
Mm.
regret that because I'd like to, not just because of it's where I come from, whatever, but it just I like to read. I like to read about other things. So like what you were talking about makes sense to me. Though what they're doing in the schools, it's like just get rid of it. I'm like, no. Why do you want to lessen what students learn? Like I said, bring in the myths from Africa, bring in the storytelling. Like there was empires in Africa, before it was colonized. I mean, Ethiopia had a huge empire. They took over other people. I mean, there was cultures down there. Let's go study them. I
And
never
one of the
hear that.
classic, well, in one of the classic tenets of Greek tragedy is you have someone who's of high or noble status and they're being brought down by what's called their tragic flaw. I'm sure that there have to be, if someone wanted to create a tragedy in the style of, the Greek tradition using, Ethiopia or the Kingdom of Benin or something like that, then that would attract an audience. That could be very, that could be a powerful story to tell. But but the viewpoint on it is it's so narrow now. It's just about, we'll get rid of this because I don't even know, because I mean I'm still parsing through a lot of this nonsense myself, and developing a better understanding of the ideology driving these purges. Um, but I mean, I agree. It's you're depriving young people of the wisdom and truths that were uncovered and expressed by authors and writers of the past. And I think what's lost, we call these things period pieces. You're doing a Chekhov play. Anton Chekhov is a noted Russian playwright. Those Russians, they kept turning out good writers for some reason. And his depth of understanding of the human condition, of psychology, as well as his storytelling ability. He crafted something very unique. And I'm watching these Russians talk about their own suffering, and I'm myself am finding, ways to relate to it. And what one of my things is that we are a part of this huge human chain, this human condition. And the more that cultures change, the more the civilizations change, it doesn't really matter that as much, because what motivates us remains, stays constant. And I think if more young people are made aware that, whether it's a Sophocles play from 2000 years ago, or a Shakespeare play from 500 years ago, or an August Wilson play from 20 years ago, there's still a connection between who we are and our shared humanity. And as divided as we are, if you are excising these kinds of literary and artistic experiences from these curricula, then you're denying people the understanding of that, and you're actually in ways creating even more division, even more of the division that people are claiming that they don't want. And and they're actually otherizing otherizing
Oh,
other people in a weird way.
but I mean, like like we were talking about like the classics and stuff like that. I'm forgetting the author now because some of the stuff I read it, over 20 years ago. Um, but it was the Greek play. I think it was Antigone, where the women decide to stop sleeping with the men if they go to off to war.
It's Liz Estrada.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, like I said, I was
Yeah,
like like I said, over 20 years ago. I think that one was like closer to
yeah, yeah.
30. But okay, you could teach that to kids. It doesn't matter what. Like, okay, she's not going to sleep with him because she wants him to do something like that. I mean, okay, that's a common trope. Like it's being used over and over and over again. But I mean, I don't want to say that's the origin of it, but maybe in the West, that's one of the earliest forms that we have of it written down. And I mean, you could,
Well, I think it. It speaks to things that are fundamentally true about men and about women, and what motivates us. And but a story like that, unless it's told from the perspective of female empowerment today, I guess it would be taboo to say. I mean, another example I like to use is the Macbeths in Shakespeare's Macbeth. There's a scene. The character of Lady Macbeth in particular is very interesting because the first half of the play, she talks a real big game, and she has a whole monologue where she's like, unsex me here. That's what it's called. She says she wishes that she weren't a man. She looks around her, she sees all of these weak men who won't step up to the plate, and particularly her husband Macbeth, the title character. And there's a scene where she basically convinces him to assassinate the king so that he himself may rise to power and she becomes the queen. And there's this great scene where Macbeth has an attack of his consciousness, and he can't do it. He refuses to kill this king. This king has been loyal to him this entire time, And at this point, Macbeth is being celebrated as a war hero and someone who saved Scotland, where the play is set. And this entire scene, she is needling him and needling him. She's questioning his manhood. She's like, "What are you afraid? You're so weak." And he's saying, "I can't do it." And so you see this manipulation happening, where finally this woman, she doesn't use force, but she does question who he is as a man. And finally, he ends up relenting. And the thing about that is that, I'm sure there are many, many men who can identify with being pushed into doing something they don't want to do because of the insistence and I guess you would call it the social and even emotional manipulation of their female partner. And, some might call it nagging to reduce it to that sort of a level. But what's interesting is that in the second half of the play, and it's sort of, tangentially related, but she ends up being unable to deal with the weight of what her actions have caused, and so she ends up having a mental breakdown and she kills herself off stage. And so it's such a fascinating character arc. But what I love about that scene, and I think about it, if I'm an actor approaching it, playing Macbeth, and my acting partner is playing Lady Macbeth, I really feel like there's a realm where we could both attack the scene from completely different angles, as a man and as a woman, because that's what it is. It's a domestic dispute between the two of them, and they can have completely divergent views about how the scene should go, but it can still work because at the core of it, you're having this man and this woman who are married, and they're having a very intense conflict, and they have to negotiate around that. And again, it just goes back to these sort of truths about who men and women are. Another example I can think of is Mark Antony and Cleopatra from Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Mark Antony is this great general who's going off winning wars and fighting battles, but Cleopatra has him wrapped around his finger. He will do anything that she says, and it causes both their downfalls at the end of it. But at the end of it, they can't get enough of each other. It's kind of toxic in a way. But these are stories that are hundreds of years old again. And we still see these same sorts of things in our own lives. And, but at the same time, I think these writers from the past, they were unencumbered by, concepts such as political correctness. And so they had more of a mandate to tell, or more leeway to tell the truth. And that's about the truth about who we are as people. And, I think once you begin to lose that's why you get more and more people who become unmoored from reality and unmoored from what we are as people. I mean, it's not that you want to exclude others or more marginalized people, but it's also say, okay, look, we can include you all as well, but we also can't forget the root and the core of who we are, and that's what these stories reflect back to us. And we lose that if we just keep excising these great writers, trying to find the most obscure, examples of diverse authors.
Now, you mentioned playing Macbeth. Now, again, this gets back to the representation. I really don't have a problem. I think actually, someone like Idris Elba, I think he would make a great James Bond. Like, I don't really have an issue with that. Yes, I know the character fictionally was white, whatever, right? But you can write that in. And same thing with Shakespeare. This isn't technically Shakespeare, but the movie Ran, it came out in the 80s. was a Japanese movie, and it was basically the King Lear story, but it was told with sons instead of daughters. And it's like I said, it's all Japanese. I mean, like something like Shakespeare, it shouldn't matter. Okay, I guess if you're playing Othello, yes, that kind of makes a difference. Laurence Olivier in blackface is a little, taboo right now, but
a little bit.
But like my high school used to do Shakespeare every year. We put on one play every year, and that's the play we learned in English class that year. It didn't matter that black kids were playing the lead in a Shakespeare play, and it shouldn't. But like, where's that coming from? Like, where like is that coming from actors? Is that coming from like the acting guild, or like where's that kind of drive of saying only X can play X? Like when I see Scarlett Johansson apologizing for wanting to play a trans woman, I'm like, aren't you acting? Like, isn't that the whole point?
Well, what you're talking about, there's a practice that's very prevalent in the theater, and in the opera as well. I think in some ways the opera was sort of ahead of the game in terms of what I'm talking about, but it's called a non-traditional casting, otherwise known as colorblind casting. And that's basically, it's what it sounds like. It's where you take a play that, like a Shakespeare play, for instance, that would traditionally be populated by white actors or European actors, and you put people of any race, color, creed into it. And the reason that it works, and the reason that most people don't have an issue with it, some do, like sometimes it can be hard to follow a story because, like Hamlet's father might be played by a black person, but Hamlet himself, might be white, or vice versa. And sometimes you get people like audience members who complain about that kind of a thing, but generally it's okay because the race of the character has very, very little impact on where the story goes, and it's not really an important issue as far as having the narrative make sense. Although anyway, when you think about it, it will be tough to be truthful anyway. I mean, if you're doing Julius Caesar, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, it's set in Rome. Most of the actors ain't going to be Italian that you're working with anyway. You know what I mean? So it's kind of moot. But the flip side is that when you're talking about a play such as A Raisin in the Sun or any of August Wilson's works, being black is central to the message or the themes of the story. So it doesn't really work in reverse. But when you have someone like a Scarlett Johansson who has to apologize for something, I mean, it depends on. It sounds to me like the complaint is probably because being trans is central to the given circumstance. What we call them given circumstances of the story, and thus, if an individual isn't transgender, it might not make the story make sense. But even that said, I don't know the specifics of the whole ScarJo thing, but it's like, how many transgender actresses can you think of have the same sort of clout that Scarlett Johansson does? There, it's a business as well, and there's not many. And I guess the choice is, you could have ScarJo play it and her not be trans, still have a trans story, or you could have somebody who is actually trans. And of course, there's one of the jokes about acting is that so many people want to do it that if you needed a 6 foot tall Korean midget, you would be able to find some 6 foot tall Korean midget who could act the part. There's somebody out there. So that's kind of the sort of milk toasty both sides argument of it. And but at the same time, it's like, Tom Hanks in the 90s played a gay character in the movie Philadelphia, which is like, right in the middle of the AIDS epidemic. And it was very powerful portrayal. But nowadays, I don't think Tom Hanks would be able to get away with playing that role. Okay, so, I'm not sure what, they call themselves progressive, but progressive relative to what, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay. Like what you mentioned about Raising the Sun. Okay. I get that. Like, I'm sure there's plays I'm not just like trying to think of one right now where it's specific to a white family or a Jewish family or something like that, so I can see, someone trying to do Raising the Sun with a Japanese cast, or, it's gonna be hard to push. But I'm just talking about in general and just fiction and just, the vast majority of stories that are out there that are fiction, I don't think should have an issue. Like there's that one series out in the UK right now. I think I don't know if it's UK or if it's Netflix or something, but and there was a lot of complaints about it. They have like Asian and like black characters in the nobility and things like that. Now, someone wrote something about it recently, and it was apparently like it's supposed to be a alternate history where the British actually signed some agreement like back at that time period, and so they're just showing an alternate history. So like, I don't have a problem with that, but selling that as history, it's like, okay, well, no, it wasn't like that. Okay, we talk about slavery these days, we talk about colonialism these days, we talk about all that bad that did. So no, that didn't really happen, right? Unless it was like some Moorish king or something that came up. But if they're just doing an alternate history, I don't have a problem. But like there was that black woman who was playing Anne Boleyn. I'm like, okay, if you're making accurate historical fiction, or if you're making an actual, historical documentary or something, then I have a problem with that. Or like I said, something like Raisin in the Sun, or Pearl Buck's book, The Good Earth, about a garden in China. Like, I mean, like you would expect to see Chinese people in that, like not Norwegians, like,
yeah.
And I guess it comes down to what I'm trying to remember who said it about porn. Like, I don't really know what it is, but I know when I see it. So like, when there's something, like I said, James Bond thing, no big deal. Shakespeare, no big deal. Maybe we can get into some of Shakespeare's histories, but for the most part, the quality of the actor should be what matters, not, immutable characteristic or something.
Well, you would hope so, but I mean, I've seen a lot of people talk about that particular project you're talking about. I think it's Anne Boleyn or whoever the character's name is that's being played by a black woman, and on one hand, people need to understand that the actors are not giving themselves these jobs 9 times out of 10. So, you can't really blame them. And, they're trying to build careers, especially for women, I mean, the time window, I mean, that's one of the sad realities of the industry, is that for women, often the time window is so short so that they can capitalize on, all that they bring to the table and, make a little money off of it, hopefully. But I don't know what service it does to her career to tell the story in this way. And I agree. Like, if it's something where they're just like, we're telling this story and in a sort of stylized way. And, and if you don't like it, that's cool. But, if it's from the angle of, British history is all of our history, and this is a radical sort of retelling of this story, then that's kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of what Hamilton is, right? It's a classic and really great story told in a really theatrical way, and that you might not expect. But like you said, if it's being presented as if this was the reality, and it's supposed to be, and it's marketed as being historically accurate, then you're going to run into some backlash and problems. And one of my fears now is that for more minority actors, my fear is that audiences will begin to reflexively reject any time they see an actor who isn't white, oddly enough, ironically enough. They're going to say, like, for instance, I had a friend who I still have this particular friend. He's still alive, we're still friends. But I was doing a play off Broadway. It was an adaptation of Bizet's opera Carmen, except that Oscar Hammerstein, who's well known as a lyricist for like Carousel and Oklahoma and those sorts of Broadway classics from the Golden Age era, he decided he was going to adapt this opera and set it in 1947, during the war, and it was going to be an all black cast, and and this was done in 1947, and so I think what I just said, and so this is long before any sort of massive push for social justice or inclusion or diversity. It was just the storyteller who said, oh, wait, I see some interesting parallels. Here's a new way to tell this story. Let me adapt it, to this other sort of culture, through this other cultural lens. And when I told my friend about it, who is definitely more to the right of myself than I am, her initial reaction was like, oh God, really? They're going to like race swap Carmen? And I had to be like, whoa, slow your roll. Hold up. This is a whole different thing. They're not trying to They're not trying to reinvent the wheel. They're just taking the music from this opera, and they're it's actually really a form of cultural appropriation if you think about it. They're taking this European art form and then they're filtering it through the lens of this Black American experience in the mid 20th century, during World War II, and and it's really interesting, and it was a really successful production. But me having to talk her off the ledge and having to interest her in seeing it, my concern is that there's going to be more and more of that kind of backlash, be it in comic books or in video. Like, people's initial reaction is going to be like, well, it's a Black character. They're not going to be like, oh, that's cool. They're going to be like, well, what message are they trying to send right now? What are their politics behind this? And I'm just not going to support that. Maybe I might be overshooting it, but I do worry about that kind of just maybe subterranean backlash to get into form against actors who look like me, frankly.
Okay, well, look, I mean, I get that because, okay, the Captain Marvel movie. Like, I like the comic book movies. I used to read a lot of comics when I was a kid. So,
Same.
When it came out, I went and saw it. I'd heard all this stuff, and I was like, all right, it wasn't great, but it wasn't nearly as bad as everyone was saying. I'm like, okay, the parts with Brie Larson and Samuel L. Jackson, that was just basically a cop buddy movie. That's all it was.
Right.
I mean, and it was,
yeah.
And like, one bit of it, like when they played the what song do they play? Like, I'm Just a Girl.
The No Doubt song.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, fine. You got a little bit of girl power in there, but even then, like, it kind of fit in with the movie and it was okay. But I mean, just the reflexive reaction, like, I don't want to go see this because it's, it's gonna, and I see that. Like, like on my end, I noticed all this stuff in 2014. Like, I'd been away from 2002 to 2000. I came back to Canada in 2014, like in end of February, beginning of March. And I was away in war zones and stuff. I mean, I'd come back on leave and things, but I didn't follow anything on social media, didn't really pay attention to any of the stuff that was going on. So I was like the frog thrown in a boil of water, just freaking out, like, what the hell is going on here?
Right.
But yeah, I've been saying, like, you're going to get an overcorrection now. Like, I mean, the thing in Charlottesville, I'm like, okay, that's an overcorrection. Like, you've been telling everyone to focus on race and focus on their racial identity in a majority white populated country, and you're scratching your head wondering why Charlottesville happened. Like how stupid are you? Like,
it shouldn't be a mystery as to why people are shouting in the streets with tiki torches saying, "You will not replace us." I mean, it's not to sympathize or condone what they were doing, but it's like, well, you mentioned, I mean, I know that Newton now has been canceled, but it's, what's that rule? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I mean, it applies to real life as well. And people just, I don't see how they can't make that connection, or they're refusing to do it.
Oh yeah, I know, but I mean, like and I'm still worried. Like I said, I've been paying attention to the schools, and I started reading up into the schools and stuff about around 2018, and like, this was in high schools in around 2010. And then after George Floyd, all you had was Black Lives Matter curriculum going across, public schools in the country, and
the 1619 project as well.
Oh, but yeah, but I mean, okay, there's a school in Pennsylvania, or one district in Pennsylvania, so I don't know how many schools, and it's just a kindergarten kids. The book's called Not My Idea. It's about how whiteness is bad. And near the end of the book, there's a contract. It shows you what a contract to whiteness is. And it says whiteness has always been a bad idea. And if you sign this contract to whiteness, you're selling your soul, and you get to oppress people. You get free land. You get blah, blah, blah.
This is a children's book?
Kindergarten. I'm like, no, man, you don't do that. Like,
it's
there was another place I heard about. I think the school is being sued. I'd have to go back and check, but it was first graders and second graders. They got them to dress up as the KKK and Night Riders, and the Night Riders right after the Civil War, and got them to run around the classrooms. I'm like, what are you doing to kids?
It's like I mean, you almost wish for a return to cowboys and Indians, to much simpler times. But it's, I keep thinking of the Christopher Hitchens quote about, I'm sure he's not the first person to really articulate this, but, religion is one of the things that can make otherwise good people believe in bad ideas. And this, to me, is part and parcel of these bad ideas. These people are acting in a way that's consistent with their vision of the world, but also, frankly, it's in line with their religion. You know, it's like, well, you know, they talk about like a lot of secularists, for instance, will talk about the evils of Christianity and how it was used to justify slavery, as an example. Well, here, what you're doing is you're justifying racism in service of your secular religion right now, and you have all the same kinds of righteousness and sanctimony that we used to make fun of in evangelicals, you know, during the George W. Bush years.
Yeah.
It's the shoe is flipped now.
But there's another aspect to this, like, you know, like Scarlett Johansson can't play a trans woman, whatever. Okay, I'm not trying to, like, you know, bring acting down to one thing, but it requires imagination. It's, you know, from the part of the audience and from the performer, you have to have some imagination. Like when I see, you know, like I said, the superhero movies, people can't fly, so I gotta suspend some belief there for a minute. But now this is anecdotal, but I've heard a few anecdotes like this. A buddy of mine, he's got a 3-year-old kid. He went to go Halloween shopping with his son to pick out a costume. And he was like, I saw a couple other dads there with their kids. And he said, like, the other kids were, you know, around 9 or 10. Now, one of the dads goes to pick a costume off the shelves, and the kid says, I can't wear that. That's offensive. Now, okay, if it's a little white kid who wants to dress up as Black Panther, I mean, obviously, like, I'm not saying put, like, you know, shoe polish on his face, but buy him the goddamn costume and let him go out as Black Panther, you know, or I don't care if your little boy wants to go out as Mulan. You know, it's kids being imaginative.
And also, like, on top of that, that sorry to cut you off, but
yeah,
that shows the impact that the character of Black Panther has had.
yeah.
This Black superhero, you know, wants to be emulated by these white kids now. I mean, that is is that not progressive? Is that not these white kids saying, wow, this is a really cool character? I mean, I dressed up as Batman when I put, you know, a little shitty towel, you know, I stuffed it into my shirt and cut. My mom's pissed off, but I you know, cut little, you know, so look like Batman's cape, you know, or I take her curtain rods and try to, like, fight other kids in the neighborhood, like with fake lightsabers as Luke Skywalker. Like, I'm inspired by these kids, but now we have kids who are inspired by Black Panther. You know, and it's a great character to be inspired by. I mean, he's heroic in the classical sense. So what's wrong with that? But again, these people, like, they're cutting off their nose to spite their face, and you know, I just but again, it's their religion, I guess, if you want to
Yeah, no, I just, and also just
sorry.
Yeah, no problem. But also, like, the religion thing. That's it was actually Steven Weinberg who said that. He said bad people will do
Gotcha.
bad things, good people will do good things, but only religion will make good people do bad things. So
right, yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. But yeah, no, okay. Look, the religious aspects of this stuff. Again, when I first came back, the first thing I was like, oh, you can't say this, you can't say that. I mean, I got called a white supremacist for criticizing Islam, and I was like, huh, where's that coming from? But I'm like, these are secular blasphemy laws, and that's why, like, now I see this thing like cancel culture or whatever. I'm like, we don't need new words for this stuff. You know, or like I see a lot of people saying, oh, they're neo-racist. I'm like, you know what? No, they're not. They're just old-fashioned racist. There's nothing new about racism. You're just racist. Just call them what they are. Like, it's not fucking cancel culture. Those are blasphemy codes. These are like speech codes. You know, it's you know, someone like a professor. I'm trying to think of either. I just spoke to him recently. He's from the University of Central Florida. He put out some tweets that were in the vein of something Thomas Sowell would say. But, you know, he's not Black, and then he got fired.
Wow.
You know, okay, that you can say cancel culture or whatever, but it's, you know, again, it's blasphemy codes. You're telling him what he can't say, and it was, you know, he was talking about it, and they went back. He got fired in 2020. They went back to 2005, and some student emailed, like, they went out to his students and said, give us all the things of when he's being racist.
What?
And some student from 2005 said, well, he said this in this one classroom. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's 15 years ago. Like, I had some professors I hated in university, but never in my wildest dreams would I hold on to something they said for 15 years and just,
yeah, it's ridiculous.
But I mean, like, so like all this stuff, like, it is a religion. It is blasphemy codes. I mean, the one thing they don't have that even ISIS offered you a heaven. These people don't have a heaven. It's
yeah. Well, they do have a heaven. It is a. I've said this before, but, you know, heaven to them is a feminist utopia where God is a fat, black, transgendered quadriplegic in a hijab. That is their God. That is who they worship. And but yeah, whatever. I mean, hell is a cis heteronormative patriarchy,
Yeah,
and whatever heaven is, it's the opposite of that.
yeah. I see so much. Okay, like I know Jordan McWhorter's writing his book about this, like called The Elect, and I know he's probably going to base it.
Right.
I've
Yeah.
been reading some of it, and yes, there are a lot of Christian undertones because it came out of critical race theory came out of American law. Like it's a very specific American thing that came out of American law, and so, but it's got a lot of Islam to it too. Islam
I
has
think
this.
didn't Tulsi Gabbard make that connection? She recently, like she compared. I think she compared. I didn't see her full comments, but there was some clickbait headline that said she compared him to ISIS or something like that. And I was like, I don't know if she did that, but
Okay, but I've compared the schools that are coming out to I just call them woke madrasas, like the
wow,
specific Islamic schools. They're called madrasas, and
right, yeah,
but I mean that's when you're starting telling kindergarten kids that being white is bad. It's a bad idea, and like shit like that. Like you're indoctrinating kids at this point, so that's why I said it. But like Islam has this idea called it's jihad. So there's three forms of jihad. And
okay,
the lowest is the holy war, and you go out and kill people. Whatever the highest apparently is, um, it's an internal struggle with yourself to make yourself good. Again, from the Christian side, you had small as the gate and narrow as the path that lead it into life. In Christianity, you have this thing that's in Islam, you have this thing called the Sirat al-Mustaqim. And the Sirat al-Mustaqim is the narrow path that leads you to God, or the straight path that leads you to God. And on all sides, there's sin. Um,
mm.
Now, the ijtihad is to bring yourself on that right path. But when you look at things like white fragility or white privilege, and you check your privilege, and if you go to the D'Angelo extreme where you have to look at every single thing you did that day long in a racial lens, that's what that is. You're looking at yourself for your internal sin, and you're looking at and it's so they've picked up a lot of religious nonsense in this, and it's
wow,
I mean I kind of think of it almost like Stalin. Like the guy was a failed Russian priest, and he used what he learned in the seminary to convert people. Like he led his cult, and I mean I honestly think these people are doing the same thing. They're using the cult like aspect of it.
yeah, yeah. And what are the? I mean, I do want to do. I'm gonna dive more deeply into this. There might even be a series in there, but isn't the idea that people who are indoctrinated into cults, they're always the people who think that they could never ever be indoctrinated. Like, isn't that part of the deal? Like, that's how really highly intelligent people end up in cults. Is that am I off base in that?
I don't know anything about okay, the Michael Shermer did this thing like why smart people believe stupid things, and I've seen some of this stuff in a few other places. It's the smarter you are and the more educated you are, like like as you're going up at your doctorate levels and things like that, you get better at rationalizing things, so you can
Yeah, you know what?
rationalize your own.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I made this. I came to this conclusion. This is a few weeks ago, but I tweeted about it and I said something along those lines. Like, a powerful mind can actually be dangerous because it has that much more ability to rationalize complete nonsense. It's like it's the double-edged sword. The smarter you are, the more susceptible you are to fortifying faulty beliefs in your head.
But I mean, like, I think some of this stuff, okay, because again, it's coming out of the academy. And I think part of this is, and this is just, this could be my little tinfoil hat thing, but I've spoken to a couple academics and they agree with me, but whatever. It's the English department's not going to go to physics and say, you don't know how to do physics. And the physics department's not going to come to the English department and correct them on the literature they're studying or anything like that.
Yeah.
But the gender studies department can go to physics department saying you're being sexist. Now, someone in the physics department's like, they've got a PhD in gender studies. That's what they specialize in. I don't know. Like, I appreciate people who can go through doctorates and stuff like that. And like, I appreciate the time and effort it takes to go in there. But I think they've given so much of an appreciation to that that they're not even questioning what's coming from another PhD. Like a physicist will question another physicist. Like if for some reason Lawrence Krauss said, I can turn lead into gold, like every other physicist is going to call bullshit on that.
Like what? Yeah.
Okay. But, a gender studies PhD comes in and says, your department's too sexist. Because of that PhD, they're going to be taken aback. And I don't know if you read the book Kindly Inquisitors, Jonathan Rauch's book. He wrote it in 92 or 93, and it's really, really prescient. And he called this stuff the humanitarian threat to liberal science. Because he said, you have the authoritarian threats, so like, the evangelicals, the Ayatollah putting the fatwa out on Salman Rushdie. But he said, this is the humanitarian threat. And he was also already talking about it coming out in like 89 and 90 in universities, like stopping speech because of, it's racist. It's going to harm Black students. So you can't have racist talk. And that's what this stuff is. It's like, don't you want to be anti-racist? Don't you want to fight transphobia or homophobia? Like I saw your talk with Carrie Smith, and you'd mentioned like you're an atheist, and like same here. I haven't believed in anything in like 35 years that way. Like, but you see it in the atheist community, like the younger atheists are going through college are gravitating towards this because, especially if they came from harsh backgrounds like Islam or evangelicalism or Orthodox Judaism or anything like that. The Abrahamic faiths are misogynistic and homophobic and, the whole gamut. They see something that says it's not, but it's just as dogmatic. So they might just, okay, I know I'm no longer religious, but no one's taught them how to think differently. So they still have that dogma and they go over to this one. Like I can almost see a pipeline from that.
Well, it makes me wonder, conservatives, I see some conservatives talking about, they call it a God-shaped hole, and I'm not somebody who, I'm sure like yourself, I'm not somebody who really, they tend to come at it from the perspective of like, of humanity needs religion in some sort of way. I'm not sure they need religion, at least as I understand it, or how we colloquially understand it. But in terms of something bigger than ourselves to believe in, a cause or some sort of overarching idea to dedicate ourselves to, it seems as though this is serving. And this, again, I feel like I have so much catching up to do as I enter more into this public arena. But in terms of, but I think it has something to do with, with arts as well. But in terms of it being ritualistic and spiritual in a way, these people are dedicating themselves to a cause, to a righteous cause, to a higher cause. And just like you said, you made the comparison of madrasas, which were a hot topic a few years ago. I remember, but I also remember thinking, I don't know if you ever saw the documentary Jesus Camp. Do you remember that? Yeah. And I remember seeing it and being horrified by these children. And you see the 6 or 7-year-old little boy who's saying, "Yeah, I didn't really know what I wanted out of life." And I'm like, "Dude, you're 7. What are you talking about? What you want out of life?" And these adults who are talking about how Harry Potter is evil and it's witchcraft, and these kids are crying. They're being coaxed into these quasi-religious experiences. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, we were all horrified by that, but no one is horrified by the concept of these teachers who are telling children that there's no differences between the genders and that being white is wrong. And, and they're being basically indoctrinated. That's the word that you use. And I think it's an accurate one, into a progressive or maybe even a progressive Marxist worldview or quasi-religion, in the same way that the kids in Christian schools or in madrasas are being indoctrinated. But no one seems to have an issue with that because, and this is sort of me binging on Thomas Sowell lately in terms of how he views, our competing visions of the world, and, specifically the vision of the anointed, as he calls these people. They are this intelligentsia, these cultural elites or whatever, these people who are in charge of these educational institutions. They have one vision of the world, and all the faulty assumptions that fall in line with that almost faith-based belief, honestly, they're being pumped into the heads of these kids who are defenseless against this kind of nonsense. And I know what the solution is, other than everyone just homeschooling their kids.
But even the homeschooling, like what you said there, like the I don't think of it as a religion shaped hole, but it's more of like a lack of meaning or meaning making. But like I talked about this once, and I was on a little panel, and like what I'd mentioned was, so take the Abrahamic faiths again. So the fall from paradise, right? So Eve eats. Everyone says, "Oh, she eats the fruit of the tree of knowledge." So that's what, not everyone, but like colloquially, that's what it says. But it's not. It's the knowledge of good and evil. Like knowledge, quote unquote science. Like I'm not saying this is science, but as God was like, I did this in 6 days. I made you people. I created all this. This all comes from me. Worship me. There's your science. That was taken care of as far as God was concerned, right? The knowledge that was denied was what's good, what's evil. That is the humanities. That is philosophy. That is, thinking other than just pure, obedience to God. That's what's kind of missing. And I mean, if you take the United States, and now that was built on Enlightenment ideals. You have the Declaration of Independence, and then you have your Constitution written. I'm not going to say they ever lived up to those ideals. It took from 1776 to the end of the 1960s before, at least in law, they were legally trying to live up to those ideals. And without getting jingoistic and without getting, ultra nationalistic or anything, you can sell the story of those ideals. Not like America's the greatest, but like I said, you don't have to go that far, but just the ideals upon which it was built as a shared identity or a shared story. And I don't know if you've read Schopenhauer. Like, I haven't read a lot, but he wrote this one thing about truth. And he said, truth is like a vessel that needs to be refilled. So, I mean, you go to church every Sunday, you go to mosque every Friday, you go to synagogue every, like keep repeating these things. Like people keep going back to Anthony Robbins seminars because after about 6 months that wears off, right? Like you have to keep going back. So, I mean, again, like I think that's why education is important. If you had like they got rid of civics educations, if you actually brought back civics education and, had kids read the Federalist Papers, so you saw the founding fathers of the United States arguing amongst themselves about slavery. So you saw that debate was going on at that point. You can see the history of those ideals and how, no, they weren't lived up to, but how they started being lived, like how they started trying to cash in that check, like saying, okay, we're going to fulfill this promise. And I think like that's, if you want to talk about a religion shaped hole or whatever, but like, if you want to have an identity, you want to have something, I think it needs to be built on around something like that. And not these ideals.
I think,
go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think the concept of believing in something bigger than yourself, I think is sort of central to it, and I think when people use that term, at least when I hear it, I normally think of, well, they're thinking of God or religion, but that something bigger than yourself could be your purpose. Something bigger than yourself could be, your society or just your neighborhood. And trying to uphold whatever ideals or values that entails. I mean, that could be something that's larger than yourself, on the, maybe not on a religious level, but similarly, I mean, but going back a little bit, something that I want to say before, you mentioned like the humanities or humanitarians, and one of my struggles right now, and this sort of circles back into the arts, is the roles of beauty and transcendence. And I think the idea of transcendence is something that is more and more, it's taking up more and more storage space in my head. How can we restore transcendence to the arts? If I go and see a Marvel movie, I'm watching, I'm fully aware that I'm a grown ass man watching, Captain America Civil War or Avengers Infinity War, and ugly crying at all these, dramatic turns. But I'm so invested in it. And but it's because it's not about all the pew pew. It's not about the special effects or the CGI. It's not about the costumes. It's about the core human stories that are being told. And the more that I think about it, the more I feel like, a lot of this progressive push or whatever, it feels in a way, it's supposed to be about diversity or inclusion or love or whatever, but it feels in many ways anti-humanitarian. It's going against who we are and what we are as people. And so and infusing these ideas of of whiteness or or these ideas about gender into these kids. I mean, it's taking us away from. I mean, I guess we would be called, people with old beliefs or whatever. We'd be called dinosaurs, but it's like,
Yeah.
no, dude, like, yeah, exactly. But it's like, excuse me, but is there not a world where we can acknowledge the presence of, say, sexual minorities, and say that their minority status does not justify in any way, shape, or form discriminatory treatment or harassment or bullying, while also maintaining an understanding of who we are as people. And it feels like a lot of the arts now, it's being steered more toward advocacy and sending this kind of message or spreading this kind of belief system, as opposed to, being grounded in truth and continuing to explore, our shared human experience, although, in different novel ways, so yeah, in a way, it's sort of anti-humanitarian. I feel like I kind of hijacked where you're going with that, but
totally they have. But okay, sticking with this, I wanted to ask you this, and I don't want to keep it too much longer because I figure you're busy. But if we can kind of maybe end on this, like the Preachiness. Okay, I don't know if you ever saw the movie In the Heat of the Night with Sidney Poitier and Robert.
Yeah.
Okay,
Rod
there's that
Steiger,
one.
yeah.
Yeah, he says, they call me Mr. Tibbs. Okay.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
Okay, now you can say that's a bit of preachiness, but you know what? For when that movie was made, that was quite appropriate, and it's not over the top like I'm trying to think of like the newest Wonder Woman movie there that was like way too much over the top. Like
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah, don't bother. It's not good. But yeah, like, or even I'm trying to think, but there's some preachiness that comes out, and it's just over the top, and I don't want to watch that. Like, In the Heat of the Night was a great movie. Yes, it had a message. They were talking to you, but they were doing it with a good story, well written. It wasn't just like, it wasn't a pie in your face type of thing. Are you seeing more of that coming down the pipe? Do you see it maybe trying to change, or how's that going?
So there's a really fascinating book whose author I can't think of right now, but it's called Pictures at a Revolution. And it's centered around the 1968-1969 Academy Awards season, the race for Best Picture. And what the author does is he looks at these five films that were up for Best Picture nominations, and he goes into the background of how they were made, the major players who were involved in making them. But he also talks about how these five films were indicative of the cultural conflicts and shifts that were happening at that time. So I think it's Dr. Dolittle somehow, In the Heat of the Night, The Graduate, Bonnie and Clyde, Warren Beatty's Bonnie and Clyde, three great films. And then there was one other one who, I don't want to say Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, but it's one of these other sort of assimilationist kind of films. And it was like old Hollywood and new Hollywood and the cultural shifts that were taking place at the time. And In the Heat of the Night was one of those message films that really, hit it out of the park at the time. But as you said, the story itself, it was very, it's a very small scale, right? It's a small town down south. And you have this black detective who's coming in to solve this murder, and this bullheaded white police chief was played brilliantly by Rod Steiger, who's, I think, one of the most underrated actors ever. And but the thing is, and I was journaling about this morning, is that, for the time period and what was happening during the time, you could at least say that it may be hokey now, it may be preachy, a little bit preachy now, but at least they were reacting to a problem that was very prevalent at that time. And what I see right now is that you have these people who are sort of carrying on the same sort of struggle, the same sort of tradition of putting out this sort of, I guess you would say, maybe even anti-racist propaganda, except they're responding to an issue that does not exist. Or if it does exist, it's nowhere near to the extent that they're saying it does. And in many ways, they're creating the very circumstances that they claim to be responding to. So, I get these scripts, and there's so much of it that, it's part and parcel. Again, it's a part of this narrow block of people, this intelligentsia who is putting forth this one view of the world. They're filtering out everything that's inconvenient to that vision of the world. And it's just tough to be like, okay, I'm an actor. I'm not an activist. I just want to play cool, not cool, but interesting characters in emotionally resonant stories. Like that's pretty much all I want to do. But I don't want to. But I'm confronted constantly with these scripts that talk about one view on police brutality, or they put forth this vision of the world regarding, race or gender. You have these characters, these male characters, who are pretty much emasculated and never ever, have an idea that is superior to the female character's ideas. She has to know everything, and he has to be some bumbling dumb fuck. It's like, well, how are you a police detective if you're this incompetent and you need someone else to give you all this information? So I see it getting worse before it gets better. I read these scripts, and I'm fortunate that I get to audition as much as I do, but it becomes more and more difficult. I think that's one of the reasons, I joke that I would probably be really rich and famous by now if I just, conformed to whatever this belief was. But I read this stuff, and sorry, but I'm selective. I'm picky about the things that I choose to work on as an actor and the things that interest me. And I'm just not interested in telling more lies about the Central Park Five, or more lies about, Michael Brown and police brutality, or more lies about Trayvon Martin. I'm not sure where I was going with all of that, but I think it's just this idea that these are people who have a very strong hold on, the entertainment industry, and they control our culture. And as a result, they are also controlling our very perception of reality, which is, they're constructing this reality that doesn't reflect what the reality that In the Heat of the Night reflected. It doesn't reflect the same kind of reality even a worse movie, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I don't like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. You have Sidney Poitier, who's playing the perfect black man coming to this house. It's like, oh wow, you're here and you're actually a good guy, but at least it's reflective of somebody trying to put forth some kind of message to combat very real experiences that people were going through on the ground at the time, and now I can't say the same thing. If I watch, like a female superhero, strong female character who just knows everything and is better than everyone around them. I'm thinking to myself, well, the women in my life that are extremely intelligent and smart and extraordinary, they don't have the same kind of inferiority complex. That they don't need to see these stories of themselves reflected as like being superior to everybody else. But it's kind of a tangent. But I don't know. I think it's going to take more and more people stepping up and pushing back and just saying, we have stories to tell. We're not interested in being. It's not that you can't have work that's apolitical. I don't know if it's even really that possible. But we have to keep things grounded in truth. And right now, it feels like there's much anti-truth going on, and I think a lot of people can sense it, even if they're afraid to say anything about it.
I know that's what I keep telling some of my friends. It's like, you're not in a facts war anymore. You're in a narrative war, and it went.
Yeah.
I think it was 9/11 that really made that big shift where, like before 9/11, you always had spin. People were always going to spin bullshit, right? But you had your narrative that was shaped by the facts. After 9/11, it switched to shape the facts to fit your narrative. And it's
even then, though, you read stories about how in terms of going back to filtering, inconvenient truths. You read about how the New York Times covered Stalinist atrocities in Ukraine and in Russia. And or there was one guy who gave a speech I thought was pretty great, but he said, if you were he talked about how the New York Times was praising Japan's economy right before they slipped into a decades-long recession, or how they were talking about they were praising the Soviet Union, the United Socialist Soviet Republic, I guess, which people don't really talk about, before it collapsed. So I don't. Maybe in the age of the internet and the age of social media, these sorts of false constructed realities are metastasizing, really quickly. But I don't think this kind of thing that we're talking about is that new.
Like I said, I'm not saying it's new, and I'm not trying to say like it never happened, but I just think after 9/11, again, it was just like
it got 9/11 accelerated.
Yeah, and then a few years later, social media started happening, and that's when it really started. But like, okay, the Soviet thing, just like, again, like I said, I don't want to keep you too long, but there's a few movies that were made right around the start of World War II or just before. One of them, it was Mission to Moscow. Now, apparently, Roosevelt had asked for this movie to be made, Roosevelt had asked for the movie to be made because Russia was allying, with the Allies against the Axis, right? So it was kind of saying, "Oh, the Soviets aren't that bad." When McCarthyism came around, a lot of the people who were making those movies got put on the list, and it's like, okay, well, you know what? When the whole Dr. Seuss thing happened recently, it reminded me of this because some of these people were asked to make these movies, pro-Soviet movies. I'm like the New York Times. I'm not saying it was or wasn't. I don't know, but I read that was like pretty horrible. Like they hid that massacre, like they hid a genocide, basically, right? It was just, but some of the people who were asked to make the movies were then rounded up by McCarthy and blacklisted. And it was like the Dr. Seuss thing was that because, oh, well, look at this propaganda he made during World War II. It's like you're doing the same thing to Dr. Seuss that was done by McCarthy. Like, maybe he decided on his own to make that stuff and send it in the government, but I have a feeling that he was asked to make propaganda because he was an artist.
Right.
So, like some of the stuff, some of the pro-Russia stuff, some of the pro-Soviet Union stuff, I like that movie Mission to Moscow. I'm not saying that those people were doing it purposely for Stalin. Like that was Roosevelt asking those guys to make that movie. But yeah, I get the spin thing. I get like that it's always around, but I think it's just, again, I think it's the way it was being taught that the academia around the late 90s switched from truth to narrative. And I think that's where it kind of screwed up. Look, like I said, I don't want to keep you too long, but if you have any last words for people about acting, whatever you want to say, let people know where they can get a hold of you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, gosh, there's a lot. I mean, just going back on what you just said, dovetailing on that. I mean, this is exactly the thing that I've been thinking about lately in terms of, and I've said for years, just from a journalistic perspective. I mean, these people aren't selling you truth; they're peddling narratives, and that's how they make their money. And it's funny to see people understand that the media is bullshit, but then they still believe every word of it. And so we're on the precipice of total civilizational and societal collapse because people are ignoring these sorts of understandings. But I guess again, I'm just thinking more of just the of course, I've lost the ability to express myself. I guess I'll just close out by saying that, if anybody wants to find me, they can find me on Twitter at Clifton A. Duncan. They can find me on Instagram at Clifton Duncan online. They can also find my YouTube channel, Clifton Duncan, which I'm going to grow. I just recently completed a GoFundMe, so I was able to buy a new computer and some podcasting gear. So I'll be able to start putting out some content of my own and having more discussions just like this, and which could go on for hours. But we both have lives to lead. But I appreciate you for bringing me on and inviting me to run my mouth as always. And I'll see you on Twitter. That hellscape of rationality and good faith.
Well, thanks again for coming on. Thanks everyone for listening.